Why? I'm their guardian, aren't I? What's so wrong about asking for a little money?
Have you ever looked deep into the eyes of someone who has completely forgotten how to ask for help? Someone who carries the crushing weight of the world on shoulders far too young for such a burden? Welcome to a courtroom where the sacred concept of blood family is violently torn apart, where masks of hypocrisy are ripped off, and where the silent, choked-back tears of an 18-year-old girl made even the iron-willed Judge Judy pause in profound silence. Today, we are stepping into a case that will make your blood boil. You might think you have witnessed human greed before, but just wait until you hear exactly what this aunt did to her own orphan niece barely 14 days after her sister's funeral. This wasn't an act of charity, it was a ruthless hunt, carefully disguised beneath the noble cloak of family duty. Look closely at the plaintiff, 18-year-old Elena Ruiz. Those steady brown eyes are quiet, yet they hold a heavy exhaustion far older than her actual years. She has been sitting at that plaintiff's table for 40 minutes without a single dramatic gesture, no trembling hands, no desperate attempts to beg for the room's pity. Now, notice the cracked skin across her knuckles. Those aren't just dry hands. They are the permanent physical marks of 3:45 a.m. bakery shifts and the desperate struggle to keep her little brother's asthma inhaler filled. Look at the faint coffee stain at the cuff of her only decent blouse, and those cheap black flats polished carefully enough to show profound respect for the court, but worn thin enough to reveal absolute, grinding poverty. She wears the tired face of someone who stopped expecting human kindness before she was even old enough to drive. Now, shift your gaze across the aisle to the defendant, Angela Mercer, Elena's biological aunt and guardian of convenience. The contrast is sickening. Angela wears a luxurious cream jacket with shiny gold buttons, her glossy lip color entirely too bright and festive for a morning court hearing. Her very posture reeks of a woman who has spent her entire life mistaking toxic control for generosity. Her expensive designer handbag sits upright beside her chair like a false, purchased witness to her respectability. But as we all know, respectability is not the same thing as the truth. On paper, the case file looks painfully ordinary. Plaintiff Elena Ruiz suing defendant Angela Mercer for $4,985. The claim: stolen wages, retained savings, and unreimbursed living expenses. It looks like just another messy family dispute, poisoned by years of unspoken debts. But even before Judge Judy asks her very first question, she can sense that these numbers are merely the outer skin of a deeply infected wound. Miss Ruiz, Judge Judy's sharp voice slices through the heavy silence as she flips open the manila folder. You are the plaintiff. Tell me, in one clean sentence, exactly why you are suing your aunt. Elena looks up, her gaze completely unwavering, and speaks with devastating clarity. Because she took every cent I earned working 2 jobs after my mother died. And now she says I owe her for raising us, when I was the one doing it. The courtroom immediately plunges into the kind of dead silence that only happens when someone speaks a truth too raw to soften. Angela lets out a dismissive, arrogant scoff through her nose. Oh, please, she sneers. That is exactly the kind of rehearsed line she practices. Judge Judy's head snaps toward the aunt, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. You will get your chance to speak, if I decide you deserve one. Angela's smug smile instantly freezes. Judge Judy turns her attention back to the young girl. How old were you when your mother died? 17, ma'am. And how old is the us you just mentioned? My brother Mateo is 11 now. He wasn't then. A 17-year-old child working 2 grueling jobs just to keep a 10-year-old boy alive, while the adult in the room steals her wages. The spark of righteous fury in that courtroom has just been lit. As the weight of Elena's opening statement settles over the room, the camera captures a fleeting, predatory twitch in Angela's jaw. It's the look of a woman who isn't used to being challenged by someone she considers her property. Angela leans forward, her gold buttons catching the harsh courtroom lights, and lets out a sigh so theatrical it feels practiced in front of a mirror. She's making me sound like a monster, Your Honor, Angela says, her voice dripping with a forced, sugary sweetness. I took these children in when they had nowhere else to go. I gave them a roof. I gave them stability. But Elena, she's always had a problem with authority. She thinks that because she worked a few hours at a donut shop, she should suddenly be the head of the household. It was a family arrangement. Families don't keep receipts for love. Judge Judy's pen stops moving. She looks over her glasses, her eyes fixed on Angela with the precision of a hawk. In this courtroom, Mrs. Mercer, family is a noun, not a get-out-of-jail-free card. You say you didn't keep receipts. That's convenient for you. But it seems your niece didn't share your forgetfulness. Elena reaches into her plastic folder. Her hands are steady now, fueled by a quiet, burning resolve. She pulls out a small, spiral-bound notebook. It's cheap, the cover is frayed at the edges, and there are faint oil stains on the pages, remnants of the pharmacy stockroom where it was hidden. This is not a diary. This is a weapon. What is that? Judge Judy asks, her tone softening slightly. It's my ledger, Elena says. Every shift I worked, every dollar that was direct deposited into my aunt's account, and every time she told me she was holding it for Mateo's future, I wrote it all down. And I also wrote down every time I had to pay for groceries out of my tips, because the fridge was empty. The bailiff takes the notebook and hands it to the bench. The room is so quiet you can hear the rustle of the pages as Judge Judy flips through them. Angela's face begins to shift. The smug, polished mask is cracking, revealing a frantic, jagged anxiety underneath. She starts to fidget with her designer handbag, her eyes darting toward the notebook as if she wants to snatch it and burn it. This is incredibly specific, Judge Judy mutters, more to herself than the room. She reads a line aloud. October 14th, pharmacy check, $412. Aunt Angela said it's for the winter heating bill, but she bought a new rug the same day. Is that true, Miss Ruiz? Yes, ma'am, Elena whispers. I didn't mind the rug. I just minded that she told me I'd be evicted if I didn't hand over the check. She's lying, Angela screams, her voice cracking, the sugar now replaced by pure acid. She was a minor. I had every legal right to manage her finances. I was teaching her responsibility. That notebook is a fabrication, a bitter girl's fantasy. Judge Judy slams her hand onto the bench, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Sit down, she roars. You don't get to talk about responsibility while you're wearing 3 months of a teenager's wages on your back. You didn't manage her finances, you harvested them. You waited until she was at her most vulnerable, grieving her mother, and you turned her into an ATM. Elena stands perfectly still, her knuckles whitening as she grips the table. For the first time, you see a single tear track down her cheek, but she doesn't sob. She looks like a soldier who has finally reached the trench. Judge Judy turns back to the ledger, her face hardening into a mask of judicial fury. Miss Ruiz, I see a recurring entry here. Mateo's inhaler, $65. It appears multiple times. Why? Because, Elena says, her voice trembling with the first sign of real heartbreak, Aunt Angela told me that if I didn't pay for his medicine, she would call Child Protective Services and tell them I was the one neglecting him. She used my brother to keep me working. The explosion the title promised has just reached its fuse. The air in the courtroom is thick with a tension you can almost taste. Judge Judy is staring at the ledger, her thumb tracing the jagged handwriting of a girl who had to account for every penny just to survive. Across the aisle, Angela Mercer is no longer the picture of composed elegance. Her breathing is shallow, her expensive silk scarf fluttering with every nervous exhale. She realizes the secret ledger has turned her own niece into a witness she cannot silence. Mrs. Mercer, Judge Judy begins, her voice dangerously quiet, the calm before the storm. Your niece has documented $1,200 a month being transferred from her paychecks directly into your account. For a teenager working at a pharmacy and a bakery, that's nearly her entire existence. Explain to me, in a way that doesn't make me want to throw you out of my courtroom, what that money was for. Angela shifts her weight, her heels clicking sharply on the floor as she tries to regain her footing. She tilts her chin up, an act of defiance that looks more like a cornered animal trying to appear larger. It's very simple, Your Honor. It was rent, and utilities, and life lessons. You don't live in a 4-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood for free. I was teaching her that in the real world nothing is handed to you. Rent? Judge Judy repeats the word as if it's a piece of rotten fruit. You charged your orphaned 1,700 here. Old niece who was grieving her mother $1,200 a month to sleep in her own family's shadow. She had a room. She had internet. She had a seat at my table. Angela snaps, her voice rising in pitch. I have a mortgage. I have expenses. I took them in when the state would have put them in a foster home. My fee was a bargain for the stability I provided. Elena's head drops for a second, a flicker of shame passing over her face, the classic reaction of a victim who has been told they are a burden for so long that they actually started to believe it. But then She reaches into her folder again. She pulls out a stack of printed screenshots. Stability? Elena asks, her voice no longer a whisper. It's a blade. Your Honor, these are the text messages from the night I was short $50 because I had to buy Mateo a new pair of school shoes. Please look at page 3. The bailiff brings the papers to Judge Judy. As she reads, her face turns a shade of granite. She reads the messages aloud for the record. 7:45 p.m. Where is the rest of the rent? I don't care about shoes. If the full $1,200 isn't in my account by midnight, the locks are being changed. You can sleep in your car, but Mateo stays here so I can keep the survivor benefits. 8:12 p.m. Don't bother coming home for dinner. You didn't earn it today. The courtroom gasps. It's a collective intake of breath that sounds like a physical blow. This wasn't a family arrangement. This was a kidnapping of a girl's future. Angela's face goes from pale to a mottled, ugly purple. You threatened to lock an 8-year-old out and keep her 1-year-old brother as a hostage for government checks? Judge Judy's voice finally breaks into the explosion. She slams the papers down. You are not a guardian. You are a slumlum lord of the most parasitic kind. You didn't take them in out of love. You took them in because they were a revenue stream. I am her elder, Angela shrieks, finally dropping the sweet aunt persona entirely. I am the only reason they aren't on the street. She owes me for every meal she ate at my table. No, Judge Judy roars, standing up from her bench, leaning over as if to physically reach through the air and shake some sense into the woman. She doesn't owe you a dime. In fact, by the time I'm done with these calculations, you're going to find out exactly how much you owe her for the labor of her soul. Judge Judy looks at Elena, and for a split second, the iron mask of the judge cracks to reveal a grandmother's pity. Miss Ruiz, did you ever eat those meals she's talking about? Elena looks at her aunt, then back at the judge. Only the leftovers, ma'am. I usually ate a protein bar at the pharmacy, so Mateo could have the actual dinner. The fuse is gone. The explosion has arrived. The explosion hasn't just cleared the air, it has exposed a massive, hidden crater of financial depravity. Judge Judy, now standing with her hands braced on the high mahogany bench, looks down at Angela Mercer not as a litigant, but as a forensic investigator who has just found the smoking gun. Let's talk about these survivor benefits mentioned in your texts, Mrs. Mercer, Judge Judy says, her voice dropping into a low, terrifying register. When Miss Ruiz's mother passed away, her 1-year-old son, Mateo, became eligible for Social Security survivor benefits. Who is the representative payee for those checks? Angela's hands, which had been clutching her designer bag, begin to tremble. The predatory twitch in her jaw returns, but this time it's accompanied by a fine sheen of sweat breaking out on her upper lip. I am, she stammers. I'm the adult. I'm the guardian. I have to manage the household. And how much is that check every month? It's about $1,100, Angela whispers. So, Judge Judy begins, her eyes widening in disbelief. You were receiving $1,100 from the government for the boy. You were taking $1,200 a month from this girl's bakery and pharmacy wages. That is $2,300 a month in pure cash flowing into your hands, tax-free, for taking in 2 children who were already grieving. And yet, Elena tells me she had to pay for the boy's inhaler out of her tips. Where did the money go, Mrs. Mercer? Elena stands up slightly, her voice cracking the silence. Your Honor, I have the bank statements I managed to print from her computer before she changed the password. She told me the Social Security money was being invested for Mateo's college. But look at the withdrawals from last December. The bailiff brings the statements to the bench. Judge Judy scans them, her eyes darting back and forth like a laser. Suddenly, she stops. She looks at Angela, then back at the paper, then back at Angela's expensive cream jacket, Nordstrom, $800, spa treatments, $450, a lease payment on a brand new Lexus, Lupe Mayon. And here, Judge Judy points a sharp finger at the paper, a $300 dinner at a steakhouse on the same night you told Elena there was no money for groceries and she had to eat a protein bar at work. The silence that follows is deafening. It is the silence of a moral vacuum. Angela tries to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I have to maintain a certain image for my real estate business. If I don't look successful, I can't provide for them. It's an investment in our future. An investment? Judge Judy's voice rises to a crescendo. You were eating filet mignon while a 10-year-old boy was using an expired inhaler because his sister couldn't scrape together the copay? You weren't providing for them, lady. You were cannibalizing them. You were using their mother's death as a lifestyle upgrade. Angela's face turns a hideous shade of red. The respectable aunt is gone. In her place is a woman whose greed has been stripped naked in front of a national audience. She's ungrateful. Angela screams, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. I gave up my freedom for those brats. I could have been traveling. I could have been living my life. You were living your life, Judge Judy snaps back, on the blood, sweat, and tears of a girl who hasn't had a full night's sleep in a year. You didn't give up your freedom. You bought a Lexus with it. Judge Judy turns to Elena, her expression softening for a brief, rare moment. Miss Ruiz, I want you to look at me. You are not a burden. You have been the only adult in that house. And today, the bank of Angela Mercer is officially closed for business. But the real twist is yet to come. Because as Judge Judy looks deeper into the records, she realizes that the $4,985 Elena is suing for is barely the tip of the iceberg. The atmosphere in the courtroom has shifted from mere tension to a palpable electric heat. Judge Judy sits back, her eyes fixed on a document that Angela Mercer has just handed to the bailiff. It's not a defense, it's a counterclaim. A countersuit for emotional distress and unreimbursed childcare expenses, totaling $5,000. I'm looking at this list, Mrs. Mercer, Judge Judy says, her voice trembling with a rare, controlled fury. And I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. You are charging this young woman $150 a week for life coaching and emotional guidance? Angela crosses her arms, her chin tilted at that same arrogant angle. I spent hours talking her through her grief. I sat with her while she cried. I gave up my Friday nights to mentor her on how to be a functioning member of society. My time is worth $250 an hour in the real estate world. I gave her a discount. The silence that follows is so heavy it feels like it might crack the floorboards. Elena looks down at her hands, those same cracked, overworked hands, and a small, bitter smile touches her lips. It's the smile of someone who has finally seen the full extent of a monster's delusion. You charged your niece for a shoulder to cry on after her mother died? Judge Judy's voice is a low, dangerous growl. You itemized empathy at $150 a week? Mrs. Mercer, I have been on this bench for a long time. I have seen the dregs of humanity. I have seen people steal from their neighbors and lie to their spouses, but I have rarely seen someone so morally bankrupt that they put a price tag on a grieving child's tears. She was difficult, Angela shrieks, her voice hitting a glass-shattering register. She was moody. She was always tired, always moping around. She made my house feel like a funeral home. I had to buy candles and essential oils just to clear the negative energy she brought in. Who pays for that? I do. She was moping because she was working 48 hours a week while attending high school and raising a 10-year-old. Judge Judy slams her gavel down, not to call for order, but to punctuate the sheer absurdity of the woman standing before her. She was tired because she was doing your job and then coming home to pay you for the privilege of doing it? Judge Judy flips through the school records Elena provided earlier, the ones Angela didn't think she had. I see something interesting here, Mrs. Mercer. According to Mateo's school, there was only one parent who showed up for the parent-teacher conferences, only one person who signed the permission slips for his field trips, only one person who met with the school nurse when he had an asthma attack in the cafeteria. Judge Judy looks up, her eyes like cold steel. That person wasn't the life coach standing at the defendant's table. It was the one 7-year-old girl you were charging rent to. You weren't providing guidance. You were an absentee landlord who occasionally shouted at the tenants. Angela's eyes dart around the room, looking for an escape, an ally, or a loophole. But there are none left. She reaches for her designer bag, her movements jerky and panicked. This is a setup. She's been planning this. She's been collecting things to make me look bad. I did everything for those kids. You did everything to those kids, Judge Judy corrects her, her voice cutting through the noise like a guillotine. And this countersuit for emotional distress? I'm dismissing it with prejudice. In fact, the only person here suffering from emotional distress is me from having to listen to your pathetic excuses for another minute. But Judge Judy isn't done. She leans forward, her gaze softening as it lands on Elena. Miss Ruiz, you said there was something in the secret ledger about the day you turned 18. Tell me about that day. Elena's voice is steady, but the pain behind it is fresh. It was my birthday, I thought. I thought maybe things would change. But that's the day she told me I had to sign a contract, or she'd put Mateo in the car and drive him to a shelter right then and there. The contract is the final piece of the puzzle, and it's about to bring the house down. The courtroom air feels increasingly thin, as if the sheer weight of Angela Mercer's greed is sucking the oxygen out of the room. Judge Judy is now holding a single sheet of paper that the bailiff has just retrieved from Elena's folder. It's a standard piece of white printer paper, but the words typed onto it represent a level of cruelty that goes beyond simple theft. "I am looking at a document," Judge Judy says, her voice trembling with a cold, calculated fury. It is dated October 12th, Elena's 18th birthday. Most girls get a cake or a card on their 18th birthday. Elena Ruiz got a repayment and guardianship continuation agreement. "Mrs. Mercer, did you draft this?" Angela doesn't look at the judge. She's busy adjusting her gold watch, her eyes fixed on the exit sign. "My lawyer friend said it was a good way to formalize the arrangement. It's just a contract." She signed it voluntarily. Voluntarily? Judge Judy laughs. But there is no humor in it. It's a sound like dry bones snapping. "Let me read the terms of this voluntary agreement. I, Elena Ruiz, acknowledge a debt of $15,000 for housing and care provided to me and my brother from the date of my mother's death. I agree to pay $500 a month for the next 10 years. Failure to pay will result in the immediate eviction of my brother, Mateo, into the state foster care system." The courtroom is silent. Even the bailiff, who has seen everything in 20 years of service, looks away in disgust. Judge Judy stares at the signature at the bottom of the page. It's shaky. It's the signature of a girl who was crying while she wrote her name. "Miss Ruiz," Judge Judy says, her eyes softening as she looks at the young woman. "Tell me exactly what happened the night you signed this." Elena takes a deep breath, her shoulders square, though her voice is thick with the memory of that night. "It was 11:00 p.m. I had just finished my double shift. I walked in, and my aunt had Mateo's bags packed by the front door. He was crying, asking where he was going. She told me that now that I was 18, I was legally an adult, and she had no obligation to keep an anchor like Mateo in her house. She said if I didn't sign that paper, acknowledging the debt and promising the payments, she would drive him to the 4-hour crisis center and leave him there as an abandoned ward of the state." "And you believed her?" Judge Judy asks. "I didn't have a choice, ma'am," Elena whispers, a single tear finally escaping. "I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have money for a deposit on an apartment. I just had my brother's hand in mine. I would have signed my soul away to keep him from a shelter." Judge Judy slams the paper down on her desk. "Mrs. Mercer, look at me. Look at me right now." Angela slowly raises her head, her face a mask of indignant defiance. "I was protecting my assets. I have a right to be compensated." "Compensated for what?" Judge Judy roars. "For the Social Security checks you stole? For the $1,200 a month in rent you extorted from a child? This isn't a contract, lady. This is a ransom note. In the eyes of the law, this is called unconscionable. It was signed under extreme duress. It is not only void, it is a confession of a crime." Judge Judy leans so far over the bench she is almost nose to nose with the aunt. "You used a 10-year-old boy as a bargaining chip to enslave his sister. You sat there, in your Nordstrom jacket, and you watched this girl work herself to the bone so you could pay for your Lexus, and then you had the audacity to try and lock her into a 10-year debt for the privilege of you not dumping her brother on the street." Angela's mouth hangs open, but no words come out. The real estate professional persona has completely disintegrated. She looks small, mean, and utterly exposed. "You're not just a bad aunt, Mrs. Mercer," Judge Judy says, her voice dropping to a whisper that carries more weight than any scream. "You are a predator, and predators don't belong in the seats of guardians. They belong in the seats of the accused." But the biggest blow is yet to come, because Judge Judy has noticed a small, handwritten note on the back of the contract, a note that changes everything about who truly owns the house they've been living in. The air in the courtroom is so thick with tension that the sound of Judge Judy turning a page feels like a thunderclap. She is looking at the back of the birthday contract, where a faint, handwritten note in faded blue ink changes the entire legal landscape of this case. "Mrs. Mercer," Judge Judy says, her voice dropping into that low, rhythmic tone she uses right before she delivers a knockout blow. "You've spent the last hour telling me that you own this house. You've told me that Elena and Mateo were guests in your home, and that you had every right to charge them rent, utilities, and even a fee for your emotional guidance. Is that correct?" Angela Mercer adjusts her silk scarf, her eyes flashing with a final spark of arrogance. That is correct, Your Honor. It's my deed, my mortgage, and my rules. I was doing them a favor by letting them stay under my roof. Well, that's interesting, Judge Judy says, tapping the back of the contract with a sharp fingernail. Because according to this handwritten addendum signed by your late sister, Maria, just 3 days before she passed, this house wasn't entirely yours. It says here, and I quote, "In the event of my passing, my 50% equity in our shared family home is to be held in a trust for my children, Elena and Mateo, to ensure they always have a roof over their heads." The courtroom gasps. Angela's face goes from a mottled purple to a ghostly, chalky white. Her hand flies to her throat, clutching her gold necklace as if it's choking her. "You didn't just steal their wages, Mrs. Mercer," Judge Judy roars, her voice finally breaking into a full-scale explosion. "You were charging them rent to live in a house they already owned half off. You were extorting a 17-year-old girl for housing that her mother had already paid for with a lifetime of equity. You weren't a landlord, you were a squatter in their inheritance. That note isn't legal," Angela shrieks, her voice cracking with desperation. "She was on medication. She didn't know what she was signing. I'm the one who paid the property taxes this year." "You paid the taxes with Elena's money," Judge Judy screams back, slamming her hand onto the bench so hard the water glass rattles. "I have the ledger right here. Every time you took her rent money, you used it to cover the mortgage and the taxes on a property that half belongs to her. You've been using these orphans as a personal piggy bank to build your own real estate portfolio." Judge Judy turns to the bailiff, her eyes blazing. "Bird, call the district attorney's office. I want a full fraud investigation into the management of this estate. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. This is grand larceny, embezzlement of survivor benefits, and child endangerment." Angela collapses back into her chair, her designer bag sliding off the table and hitting the floor with a heavy thud. The real estate professional is gone. All that's left is a woman whose greed has finally outrun her shadow. Judge Judy looks at Elena. The girl is shaking now, the stoic mask she wore for a year, finally crumbling as the realization hits her. She doesn't owe $15,000. She doesn't owe rent. She owns a home. "Miss Ruiz," Judge Judy says, her voice remarkably gentle, "you thought you were fighting for $4,985 today? But you were actually fighting for your life, your brother's future, and your mother's legacy. And let me tell you something, your mother would be damn proud of the woman you've become. But there is one final piece of business." Judge Judy looks at the countersuit Angela filed for $5,000. She picks it up, stares at it for a second, and then does something she rarely does. She slowly, deliberately, rips the countersuit into 4 pieces and drops them into the trash can. "Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5,000, the maximum allowed in this court," Judge Judy declares. "And believe me, if I could award you the whole house right now, I'd hand you the keys myself." The final chapter is about to close, but not before Judge Judy gives Angela Mercer one last lesson she will never forget. The final scene of this legal tragedy unfolds with the heavy, rhythmic thud of Judge Judy's gavel, a sound that, for the first time in a year, represents safety rather than a threat for Elena and Mateo. Judge Judy leans forward, her eyes fixated on Angela Mercer, who is now shrinking into her expensive cream jacket, looking more like a hollow shell than a successful professional. The countersuit for emotional distress has been shredded, the birthday contract has been declared a ransom note, and the theft of the family home has been exposed. "Mrs. Mercer," Judge Judy says, her voice echoing through the silent gallery, "you came into this courtroom today thinking you were the master of this house. You thought you could use the law to validate your greed. But the law is not a weapon for predators, it is a shield for the innocent. And today, that shield belongs to Elena." Judge Judy turns her gaze to the 8-year-old girl. Elena is standing tall, her hand resting on the shoulder of her 1-year-old brother, Mateo, who has been brought into the room for the final verdict. For the first time, the cracked hands of the worker are resting in peace. "Miss Ruiz," the judge says softly, "this court awards you the statutory maximum of $5,000. But more importantly, I am issuing a temporary restraining order effective immediately. Mrs. Mercer, you have 24 hours to vacate that property. You will take your Lexus, you will take your Nordstrom jackets, and you will leave the keys to a house that you have systematically defiled with your presence." Angela gasps, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of outrage. "You can't do that. I have nowhere to go." "Then I suggest you find a life coach and pay them $250 an hour to help you figure it out." Judge Judy snaps back, a flash of her trademark wit cutting through the tension. "Bird, escort this woman out of my sight. I have a headache from the sheer stench of her entitlement." As the bailiff leads a sobbing, frantic Angela Mercer toward the exit, the camera pans back to Elena. She isn't cheering, she isn't gloating. She simply pulls Mateo closer and closes her eyes. The weight of the world hasn't disappeared, but for the first time, she doesn't have to carry it alone. "One more thing," Judge Judy calls out as Elena prepares to leave. "The Social Security Administration has been notified. They will be seeking full restitution of every penny of Mateo's survivor benefits you spent on spas and steakhouses. And since you're a real estate agent, I'm sure you know exactly how much your own assets are worth, because the government is coming for all of them." The final shot shows Elena and Mateo walking through the heavy double doors of the courthouse. The sun is hitting the steps, and for the first time in 365 days, Elena isn't checking her watch for a second shift. She is just a sister, walking home with her brother to a home that finally, truly belongs to them. Judgment for the plaintiff, Judge Judy mutters to herself as she gathers her papers, "And may God have mercy on that aunt, because I certainly didn't."